days. That's not really unusual that time of year, but the cloud ceiling was about 75 feet off the ground. And I was coming home. I was heading southbound on a road, and I had the shade open to the moonroof of my car, and I saw a shadow. And I thought, well, that's too big for a bird. But something, just a light shadow, and it caught my attention, and it kind of, rippled over the windshield, this shadow. And so I lowered my head, and I looked down under my roof line, and I looked out, and about 200 feet in front of me was a craft. And I eventually determined it to be about 90 feet wide. And the way I did that is after I watched it for about 7 to 8 seconds, slip into an opening of this very low cloud ceiling. And I swear this craft was no more than 75 feet off the ground, just floating silently from wherever it came from through this opening and then back. And it was just enveloped in this cloud bank. And I went back eventually and I measured the length of the building. And then I went back to the street, took a photograph of where my car was into that area where I saw the craft. And I was able to determine with some real simple math what the width of the craft was. It was about 90 feet in width.
How about the width?
Yes.
The width, was it thin or was it fairly?
No. Well, it was really strange. It, again, in book number 1 of the 50 Shades of Gray's trilogy, there's a photograph of the area, and then I went back with a graphics program, and I drew into that program what I saw. So, it's a really rough drawing, but it gives the reader the opportunity to see exactly from where I was in the street, which was really crazy because I was playing Frogger that day to take a photograph in the middle of a 4-lane highway.
I've done that, believe me.
See, you're a photographer.
Oh, yeah.
So I did that, and then I went back and I used a graphics program, and I drew that in. So the odd thing is it had these very large, the height of the back end, I basically only saw the back end, but it had these large ports, which I have to assume might be engines or some way to propel this thing forward with magnetics, whatever comes out of that. But there were like 5 large, dark colored circles that went from the top of the craft, the entire height of the craft, and they went from left to right. There was about 5 of them. Now, growing up in Detroit, I'm a product of my environment. What I should have been thinking when I saw the craft was, holy cow, that's a UFO. But Gary, do you know what went through my head?
I want to know what actually, when you saw that, I bet you didn't digest it.
I said, oh my God, that looks like the back end of a 1960s Chevy.
I didn't mean to laugh, but I mean...
That's what it looked like. 'Cause remember, they had 3 circular lights on the back end. On each end, they were called the cat eyes.
Oh, yeah.
They had 3 lights on the left and 3 lights on the back. They were the brake lights on these Chevys, maybe the mid-'60s.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what went through my head. I go, that looks like a Chevy. And then I snapped out of it. I go, that was a freaking UFO.
Yeah, how long did it take you to snap out of it?
6 months.
Yeah. It's called denial. It's called denial.
No. It could be called denial, but you know what? There's a thing called the Oz factor. And people who have missing time often experience this where, and again, we could get deep, but it has to do with electromagnetic fields, and it affects your brain waves. It basically is an implant of a memory or an erasure of a memory. And what happened is I went home and I drew the object because that was in my brain. I got a piece of paper in the office I'm sitting in right now, and I drew this thing out and I put the circles on it. And I put this paper away. And every time I was out driving around or going to another therapy appointment and going past that point where I saw it, I go, when I get home, I'm going to write about it. But do you know that every time I got home, I would pull out that piece of paper, I would pull out that drawing, and I couldn't remember why I was sitting in my office with that drawing in my hand.
Well, it makes logical sense. But I got to ask you a question. A couple of the people were asking out there on one of the chats, they said, why didn't you take a picture of it?
Well, first of all, I was, this was in 2011, and for sure, the phone was not in my hand. That's, I don't drive and text. It was probably in my front pocket, so I would have to have released the seatbelt, got my hand in there, turned it on, that kind of thing. Second of all, there was a red light in front of me. And so while one eyeball was up looking skyward at this thing, the other eyeball was looking ahead of me, and while I was hitting the brake to make sure I didn't crash into the car stopped in front of me. So it was one of those, okay, by the time, I was processing, hit the brakes, imagine I had just been in an accident, 1 year beforehand, which caused me to retire early, and I wasn't going to have another one with my car, with my new car. So
you didn't want another accordion?
What's that?
You didn't want another accordion?
I didn't want another accordion. So that's the reason why I was basically behaving in traffic. The phone was probably in my front pocket or in the console of my car, and it wasn't until the thing was gone. Now, when the light changed, I don't even remember if I did or did not get my phone out, but the object was traveling in the direction that I was going. So as I started to continue down that highway, I kept looking up, best I could to my right and looking up, to the tree line and the clouds to see if it would pop out again. But I never saw it. And I went down at least another mile, but it never reappeared. So that's a really good question. And, I had like 7 seconds to respond with everything going on. So,
well, there's another factor to it. Okay, when you see something like that, it your brain does a brain fart. I've been in a situation, I'm not going to go into it, where I ran into something. I had a camera in my hand. I could have took a picture of it, but I was so scared in shock that I didn't even think about, aiming the camera at what I saw. All I thought about, in my case, is to run away and get out of there as fast as I could. But when you see something like that, you don't, even if you're a professional photographer for many years, when you see something you're not prepared to see, okay, that you never saw in your life before, maybe there's some people out there, maybe if there were, the photographers that go out in, like in Vietnam and World War II and the Korea and went out and took pictures, they probably would have, but the average person, I don't think so. I think your mind, you're curious what it was. You're concentrated on your driving, but it makes you confused. How's that say? Their sound.
Well, had I not been driving, I probably would have reached for my phone. But the odd thing is that for 6 months, every time I came down here and I said, I'm going to write this up, I'm going to file this with the National UFO Reporting Center. Every time I came down there was like a block. I would just stare at this picture and go, what am I doing? And then it was really weird because I got an email from a guy who was a contractor on the last project that I worked on. And he was looking for the personal email of the guy who was running the program. And I don't know what it was, but that trigger, I can only point to that as the trigger, where the block that was in my mind for that moment of coming down, looking at the paper and not being able to write about it was gone. The block was gone. And I don't know, because maybe, I had retired and, there was all that baggage, 40 years of baggage in my head. But that cleared the block. And that, as soon as I responded to that email, boom, I went and I wrote the entire thing up, put notes down of where I was coming from, the date, the time, everything. And it was 6 months, nearly to the day, that the block went away.
Interesting. Yeah. I've, and you mentioned that the UFO Reporting Center, that's Peter Davenport. He was a regular on our show here like once a week. I had Peter on my show numerous times. Like his first UFO was almost like mine. I had an encounter back in the mid-'70s. I took a job in North Carolina. I didn't like it. My wife didn't like North Carolina. So we decided to come back to Seattle. And we were in New Mexico going through the desert. And all of a sudden, the whole road lit up. And inside the car was extremely bright where it was hurting your eyes. First thing I thought, okay, well, the speed limit was really high back then, especially in New Mexico. I figured, okay, I'm getting busted because I was going fast. I had a GTO. Hey, if it didn't have a speed limit or if it was like 100-mile-an-hour limit, I was doing it. And I pull off the road and I get out of the car. And the first thing I noticed, Ray, there was no sound. I was thinking, okay, well, this must be a helicopter. But it was absolutely quiet. The desert was quiet. It was totally quiet. And then, poof, it was gone that fast without a sound. And I'll tell you, that was so scary. And I was talking to Peter Davenport about that, and he had one of those same type of experiences. And he said he gets a lot of people, those type of experiences, what I just described. And I'll tell you what, I didn't think anything about it for years and years after that. And then one day, it just kind of, for some reason, I remembered all that what happened that night. I'll tell you what, there is things going on.
Your story mirrors a lot that I've heard. And I have somehow developed this thing that I'll call experiencer radar, where I'll talk to somebody. They're just perfect strangers. I meet them at a picnic or whatever, and they start talking. And, a lot of people are now aware of what I do in my retirement years. And, they're aware of my research and my books. And I've discovered a lot of people who are unaware of their experiences. And then I'll start asking them questions. And I'd like to relate a story if I could.
Yeah, we got about 4 minutes. Can we do that before we got to take a break?
Great. I met a couple, and I asked them, why they were, at this particular conference. And they said, well, we have friends that live here. So I said, well, how do you get to Arizona from Minnesota? They go, well, we take about 3 or 4 days to drive. I said, did you ever see any strange lights? No, never saw any. So then, we're eating lunch outside, and then a couple minutes later, the woman goes, we did see that one strange light where we're in, and she names a state. And I said, really? Why don't you tell me about it? And the guy says, well, you know what? Yeah, this thing was out in front of us for about 4 hours. I go, what?
Wow.
He goes, yeah, we were following this light through the desert for like 4 hours. I said, 4 hours? What do you think it was? He goes, well, we think it was a helicopter. And I said, well, sir, and I've never met these people before in my life. I said, sir, if it was a helicopter, he'd have, gone past you in 5 minutes. Well, no, I'm pretty sure it was a helicopter. I said, well, tell me about the rest of that trip. He says, well, it was kind of unusual. He said, we wound up that night not in the town that we were going to. In fact, we wound up 4 hours in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
I said, really? Yeah. So he goes ahead and he tells me this, and I went, sir, I think you've had an experience. You're a contactee. He goes, oh, no. So when we went on, I was convinced he was, and Kathleen Martin, of course. Well, I had just met her, and I found her in the expo center setting up, and I grabbed her and said, Kathleen, you got to meet this couple. I think they have a wonderful story to tell you, and I think they're experiencers. And do you know what happened? She interviewed them. She talked to them. Later in the week, I talked to her, and she said, oh, yeah, those people are contactees. But it was really weird. They had no idea until the moment I started speaking to them. I don't know what force was guiding me, but I was asking the right questions. And in like 10 minutes, I'm a rookie. I'm just a tourist. And I was able to feel that they were contactees and ask the right questions. And then I knew I had common sense enough to bring an expert in and bring Kathleen over to have her talk to these people. And sure enough, they had an experience that they thought was a helicopter in the desert.
Oh, yeah. And just think how many people, have had those experiences. Hey, we're going to be, if you want to get yourself a cup of jam or whatever, we're going to take about a 2.5 minute break. I'm going to put you on hold, so don't hang up. We'll be back, people, in 2.5 minutes.